Okay, all right. So what we'll do here, again, I mentioned this, previous couple of classes, but working with Dash and an application framework programmatically is actually quite different than traditional data science. So a lot of times, I think some of the programming patterns don't sink in right away, and so it takes a little bit of time to get acclimated to things. So let's go ahead and let's just kind of walk through everything step by step. All right, so I have an empty Python file right here. I actually don't think I'm sharing. Okay. All right. Okay, so sharing now. All right, so what we'll do here, I'll just start with an empty screen right over here. Okay, and then step by step, we'll go ahead and then go through pretty much what we just completed. And then after that, we'll continue on and add more things to what we just did. Okay, so if you start over here, I'll go ahead and just copy the imports. Okay. All right, and so something that's basically never going to change. Okay, you create a variable here, which we're going to call app, which is pretty ubiquitous. All right, and this is literally the variable that contains all the meta information about the actual application itself that's running on the web. Okay, so in this case, you can sort of think of this thing called Dash as sort of being the equivalent, maybe in some ways, of a pandas data frame, where it's something you kind of initialize and then load data into. And then the app has a bunch of methods which are there to basically allow things to render and communicate itself over the web. All right, this part right over here. So pretty much this is again, I mentioned before, it's a system variable that's built into Python when you go ahead and start it up. So assuming you don't actually change your default Python configuration or any sort of system variables for the language, you can always use this. And then also here, if you want to use a style sheet, okay, you can pass in the addresses with the list right over here. And so I had one of these. We're going to do a fancier version of the styling, probably in about 2 classes. But for now, we'll just use the default. Okay, so notice right over here, right, the variable external style sheets. It's a list with the link to a CSS file. All right, so we'll do this. We'll just put it over here like this. Okay, that works. All right, so this thing is the application right over here, the app variable. And so what we'll do over here, all right, this is where most of the heavy lifting is done, okay, right? So inside the application, right, there is an attribute called layout, and this basically contains all the rules for how something's going to be displayed, all right? And so building layouts, everything is nested, okay? So pretty much what you're always going to be doing here is starting the entire thing with a div. If we're not familiar with this, in terms of HTML markup, this is basically just an empty block container that you stick something in. Nothing more, nothing less. All right, so if you need to take different types of visual elements and then group them together, you typically stick them inside of a div. All right, so this is essentially kind of a gigantic container that we're going to use to store everything else. Like this. All right, and then also when you're defining layouts inside Dash, probably the most important argument that you would use is called children. Okay, and this is basically any sort of visual element that you want to stick inside this one. Okay, so usually if you want to change the value or the appearance of a particular HTML element, the children argument is probably the most common attribute that you're going to go ahead and use. All right, so notice here it's a list, and so this is basically just going to go ahead and contain everything that this app is going to, everything that's going to go inside the application itself. we'll do one thing for now. Okay, paragraph right over here. Actually, we'll do something like here, H1 or H2. Okay, by the way, H1, H2 is a heading, just to make sure we're clear on this. Okay, and again, where these values are coming from, so something like H2 or div or things along those lines, these are basically the same sets of tags that you might use in a what you see is what you get editor. So if you were to ever compose an email or write a blog post or use some sort of marketing software where they ask you to define paragraph or bolded text or italics or things that are code formatted, things along those lines, all of those basically come down to some sort of HTML elements. And so we're basically, one of the reasons why Dash is a dashboarding framework is it basically allows you to define different types of HTML elements within Python that can then be rendered over the web. All right. And then here we can do this paragraph. Okay, so something like this. So all this thing is basically an empty page with just a paragraph. All right. And again, something else. Okay, you actually, if you ever write web-based applications inside Python, you actually see this quite a bit. And so essentially what this means here is if you put this at the bottom right over here, it means all of these instructions that you have here will only execute if you directly run the file. Okay, so what that means here. Okay, notice here, right? So we have the app variable right over here. So in addition, right, to sort of saying, hold all the information about the layout, let me just make sure I am using the right one. You're pretty sure it's called run server. Yeah, okay, run server, okay. Which literally means, right, initialize a web application. And we have a bunch of variables over here. By the way, some of you, if you can, setting debug equal to true can be very, very handy. It makes some things a little bit easier. Okay, but sometimes it doesn't always work out of the box on everyone's computers, specifically if you're using Windows. Okay, so you should try and be in debug state if you can. It makes some things more convenient. But again, if you're on Windows, it can be a little troublesome. But what I'm going to do over here, since I'm on a Windows computer, sometimes Dash will kind of throw up if I'm in debug mode. Usually, though, if I want to be in debug mode and not actually have my computer give up error messages, you can set this to false, which is usually what causes it to trip up. Okay. But usually, if you're on Apple computer, I don't think it's going to be too much of an issue. And I think you can just set debug equal to true, and then everything will be fine. All right, so I'll save this. All right, let me find out where this thing is. Hold on, everyone. Material, dash Potley, session 3. Okay. All right, so I'll save this as a demo app file right over here like this. We'll save it. Okay, so this is kind of a basic outline of a Flask application. Okay. And if we wanted to continue with the best practices that were discussed previous class, okay, sorry. Okay, so it is if you are in your terminal right over here. So in Windows, this would be Anaconda prompts. If you're in an Apple computer, this would just be a terminal. Okay. What we spent the first half of the previous class doing is setting up a development environment, and this just kind of ensures that whatever we produce and see on our own computer will be easily ported to other environments, which is useful if we want to deploy something. All right, so we created it last class with a little bit of friction. It wasn't, I don't think it was very pleasant, but now that it's here, all we can do here, conda activate COVID app. Okay, so this contains just the packages. If you look at this, that we installed the previous time, so pretty much just what we need for our application, but nothing more. So it just means we can kind of specify exactly what versions of every single tool that we're using. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and then navigate to the pretty much where the file lives on my own computer. All right. I think it's over here. All right, and so I look over here. Okay, so I have this. So the idea here, we're going to go ahead and then run this file using the development environment that we just activated right over here. The Python demo app.py. And apparently, you know what? I'll just go ahead. It gave me an error message. We don't really need this too much, so we'll just do this. All right, and now let's try and go ahead and rerun it. Okay, so we get this thing, all right, and then it'll tell you right over here, it's running right on port 127.008050. So you can just go ahead, copy this. All right, and then you can go ahead and then run it. All right, and you have something very, very simplistic like this. All right, so that's kind of just a brief refresher of what Dash actually is, right? It's something that allows you to declare different types of HTML markup elements and then have them render inside of a browser, even though you're writing it in Python. Okay, and then obviously you add callbacks and charts and things like that. But Dash itself basically gives you this application container that you can use to kind of stick stuff in here and make it interactive, which we're going to do as the class progresses. Okay, so questions so far? See if we're good. Okay. Okay, Edwin is all good. Okay, good, good. Devin is good. All right. And again, like anything else, if you do this around like the 5th or 6th time of writing this out, it begins to kind of sink in, things along those lines. So it's foreign now, but the idea is, 5 or 6 classes from now, after we've done this a little bit more, it'll be more coherent. Okay, all right. So in any event, we have empty application right over here. Okay, right. And so the nice thing about Dash and Plotly is that they were designed for each other. So all those charts that we did, the first part of class, we can just kind of dump them in here, and then they'll automatically render inside of a Dash application, which is a big differentiator from other charting frameworks because they are not really built for the web. Okay, so if you work in Seaborn or if you work in Matplotlib, things along those lines, they're great if you're just inside your Jupyter notebooks or whatever. But the minute you kind of want to deploy them in a way that's a bit more interactive, it's not really going to work very well. All right, so I'm going to do a little bit of copy pasting here. I'm just going to go ahead. Notice here, I am actually going to go ahead and then read in the CSV file. Okay, we're going to do that at the top of the page. All right, and then also what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and then define our chart. Okay, and again, the way you would define the chart, right, would really just be like you would just do a regular Plotly chart. Okay, so there's really nothing different about creating the graph itself. All right, so notice here, we're not using this inside of a callback yet. Okay, so I'm just kind of doing it generically here at the very, very top of the page. And actually, I think I have this in the wrong spot. Excuse me. I think I have too many files opened up. All right, so we'll take this. All right, this is a little confusing. I think here we go. Here we go. All right. Okay. All right. So we'll create the chart. Okay. Notice here this thing called state grouping has not been created yet. So I'll go and do it now. If you remember, right, it's a group by. Okay, so we will group by the state column. We'll grab the positive increase column. And then we will sum things up like this. Okay, and then we'll reset index. All right, and so just to make sure we're clear on what this does. All right, so if I take this over here and just run it over here like this, I'll have to import pandas first. Okay, and so this line, right, state grouping, so all it does okay, right, it just kind of creates a column for each of our states, and then we have the value of the positive increase right over here, so all these corresponding values like that. Okay, so that's what this variable is, and so this is what we're feeding into the chart, and then we're just kind of defining some different arguments here so it looks the way we want it to. All right, and so the way you make this show up inside of your chart, right, is, okay, there's no HTML element for a graph. Okay, so notice it right over here. If you're doing something here that natively exists inside HTML, right, you'll do HTML dot whatever. DCC stands for dash core components. Okay, and so these are the actual dash elements that are used to render data in various ways. All right, so we have this graph. Fig. All right, we'll call this main fig right over here. Okay, and then in this case, right, the argument that you use to display the data is not children, but figure. Okay, so we'll pass that in right over here. All right, and so once we run this, same thing. Let's go ahead. By the way, if you have debugger working with the reloader turned on, you can just refresh the application. That's one of the nice things about being in debug mode. But again, it doesn't always work well on Windows. There's a way to get around it. I just haven't had time to kind of get it working here on this computer. But in any event, let's go ahead. Let's run this thing. So now if we do this, okay, here it is in all of its glory. Okay, so we have the chart that shows up here. All right, and so now the big thing is, right, the important difference between this and let's say something like this, right? It's the exact same chart, all right? But the big thing is you have to write callbacks so that way this chart, you know, will actually correspond, you know, to kind of changes in here like this, okay? That's kind of the essence of what a dashboard is, okay? But we're getting there. But let's again do another heat check, make sure we're okay. All right. So I'll take the silence then as a nod of approval, like we're in good shape here. All right, and we'll just kind of finish this thing up here, and then we'll kind of go on. Yeah, go ahead, Elisa.
I have a question. I was trying to run the application, and I got an error message saying, warning, this is a development server. Do not use it in a production deployment.
Oh, yeah, that's actually fairly common. So the idea is if you actually deploy your application, you should not use debug mode. So if you just set debug equal to false, that warning would go away.
we'll do that then. Thanks.
Yeah. So that's really no problem at all. It always says that.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, no, your deployed dashboard should not be in debug mode, Elisa, but we're not there yet. So you're fine. Other questions? Okay. All right then. So just to add a bit more detail, right? The other thing that we want is this thing right over here, right? With the with the drop down values like that. Okay. So same thing. This is again another thing here. So we'll add this here. Right. Notice here, all these things are being put inside this large container. So we'll do this DCC. Notice here, right, we have things like dcc.dropdown, graph, input, interval, link, loading, location, logout button, things along those lines. All of these things, if you kind of go through these things, right, date picker range, date picker single, checklist, all that kind of stuff, all these things basically correspond to something like this or something like this. And then the idea is they basically kind of bind user input to the actual data inside your application. So anything that does that inside your dashboard is probably going to be part of the DCC library, okay? All right, so in any event, okay, so dcc.dropdown, same thing. You typically, anything you're going to use in a callback, you want to basically give an ID. So we'll call this dropdown. All right. Now, something we talked about previous class, which takes a little bit of getting used to, is how you actually pass in data, okay, into this thing. Okay, so there's this argument here called options. All right, and so big thing here, the options argument is a list of dictionaries, and it has to be formatted a particular way. And so if you don't get that right, things will not render correctly. All right, so I'm just going to do a little bit of copying and pasting. All right. So here, right, are the individual dictionaries. And so it's important to understand, right, each one of these dictionaries corresponds to a value here. Okay. And then what's also important, okay, what you pass in for the label is what's going to show up here. Okay. What you pass in for the value key right over here is what's going to be used inside the callback. Okay, so this is basically for display purposes, and this is the actual value that you want to actually be passed into a function later on. All right, and you just need a dictionary for each item from your dropdown for your dropdown. So I'm just going to go ahead, copy this. All right, and then paste it over to this one. Beautiful. Okay, notice here I'm getting a little bit of an error message, invalid syntax. That just means I forgot. All these are items inside of a list, which means everything has to be separated with a comma. So let's go ahead. All right, and then one more thing I'm going to pass in here. Okay, we actually didn't do this last class called value. Okay. And this is literally what you want the value of the dropdown to be when it opens up, okay? So whatever you put right over here has to match whatever the value is right over here. So basically, I'll say I want the numbers for hospitalization to show up first. So I'll do this. Okay, there are no error messages so far, all right? So all right, we'll rerun this. All right, and so same thing now. Okay, when we do it again, all right, we have this. Now notice here, right, as a default now, new hospitalizations is the option selected. That's because we specified that right over here. Okay, if I got rid of this, it would be blank. Okay. This argument right over here is also what we use inside the callback. Okay, this is basically what Dash adjusts when we are clicking on the different items, like if I can find it over here, like this. Okay, so anytime we choose this and then something changes as a result, okay, it's because it's basically changing the value of this argument right over here. All right, so we'll talk about the callback next, but same thing. Let's kind of do a quick temperature check, make sure everyone's in good shape. Because I actually think Dash is just a little bit weird. You know, it's really more JavaScript. It's using Python to write JavaScript. Okay, and so we are probably not web developers by trade. So, okay, Devin's good. If anyone is not good, let's speak now or forever hold your peace until the next 5 or 6 minute segment ends. Okay, but it seems like we're doing well. All right, great. Okay, so right, the big thing here, we kind of have this nice looking drop down and we have a chart, right? But the whole point of dashboards is you actually want to bind the data in your application to different values that user selects. This is kind of the essence of what a dashboard is. You know, people can just kind of idly play around with different things. So if you look over here, right, there are basically 4 different ways you can actually change what renders here. You can do this, right, change this. You can choose this, cumulative or not. Okay, and then you can also choose this right over here. Okay, and then likewise, you can click on a state right over here and then see it change right over here like this. Okay, so this thing basically has 4 different input-output loops kind of going on. All right, and that's basically the callback, and that's pretty much where we're going to be spending the rest of our class, and then probably the class after that as well. Okay, so with that being said, let's go ahead. There's a particular syntax you have to use. It is a little bit strange. And again, the reason why it works this way is because it literally is JavaScript, but just kind of ported into Python so we can go ahead and write it. Okay. Okay, so callbacks, right, is where you glue a user's choice with some sort of change that you see in the application. It's very popular. Like without callbacks, Dash itself wouldn't really have a reason for existing for the most part. All right, so the way this works, okay, you have to do this, app.callback. Okay, every single callback is always going to have input and outputs. Okay, so the input basically specifies what a user changes, and then the output specifies what happens as a result. Okay, so in this case, okay, you put an output first. These things always take 2 arguments. The first argument is the ID of whatever it is that you want to go ahead and select. Okay, this is why IDs are important. So basically here, we're going to say the output that we actually want to change is the graph. Okay, so we'll say the ID here is main fig. Okay, and then the second part right over here is the actual parts of the element that you actually want to change. So in this case, what we actually want to do here is we want to change whatever's passed into the figure argument. Okay, so basically we want to modify whatever's inside fig. Okay, so we're passing this into this part right over here. So you do that. Okay, one of the benefits of Dash, and also one of the things that gives a bit of a learning curve, is that using callbacks, you can actually specify any part of an element via one of its arguments. Okay, so anything over here, right? Options, value, figure, ID, things along those lines. All of these things can actually be specified as both input or output for a callback. Okay, which means you typically have quite a bit of flexibility for creating fairly complicated user interactions. And so for Lisa, you know, the DAC class you took where we worked with Streamlit, this is one of the areas where Dash kind of separates itself from Stream a little bit because you have a lot more customization you can use for kind of defining how your user interactions work. But in this case, right, we're basically saying, right, we have this ID for the figure. We want to change this thing. Okay, so you specify output. The input has to be put inside of a list. Okay, and then what we want to accept as input are what people choose from the dropdown. Okay, so in this case, the input, we specify the ID like this. And then actually what we want to change is this argument right over here. All right, so we'll do this. Alrighty, and so we'll go ahead. And so we'll put value right over here. All right. So this is just kind of defining how things are going to be changed inside the application. Okay. Callbacks. Okay, then have to be linked to functions. Okay, so right beneath this, you have to write a Python function. All right. And then what's important here, okay, whatever the function returns is going to be spit out to this part. Okay, so this function is going to return whatever it is that we actually want to go ahead and pass into this argument right over here. Okay, and then the arguments that accepts basically correspond to the different types of inputs right over here. Okay.
How is it linked? Like, is it just implicit because it's a function, or?
Yeah, it's linked because it's built into Dash that way, Devin.
Gotcha. Because that's what I was confused about when I was looking back. Like, I didn't see anything like running the function.
Yeah, no, this is not really like Python at all. This is kind of where like Dash just kind of has this elaborate source code to kind of set these things up.
I see. So would you only ever have one function, basically?
Actually, you'd only have one function per callback.
I see. Okay.
Okay, you can actually have as many callbacks as you want to. So you're not really limited to that, but there's a one-to-one pairing between callbacks and functions.
Okay, and then it's linked because it's the function directly after the callback.
Exactly, yeah. So basically, when you declare the callback, it'll immediately look for the next piece of executable code to be a function.
I see.
Okay. And that's like explicitly how Dash is set up in order to render values.
Right, okay.
Okay, and again, it feels weird because this is basically JavaScript programming, just with kind of like with some Python kind of wrapped around.
Right.
It's because it doesn't map very well to typical Python programming.
Right, and so just whatever the function returns, it just takes that and puts that into its second argument in the output.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so whatever the function returns is going to be spit out into this, whatever you define as the output right over here.
Right.
So in this case, this chart is going to return a Plotly figure. And so therefore, the Plotly figure that we're going to be returning is going to be linked to this ID and this argument of it.
Right.
So it's like this thing right over here.
Right. And then the argument for the function just automatically comes from the input.
It comes from the input, exactly.
Yeah.
So if we defined 3 or 4 separate inputs, we would have the corresponding number of arguments over here.
Got it. Cool.
And then, whatever it's worth, the rest of this class and the next one is basically going to be building out callbacks in different ways.
Cool.
Yeah, because actually, so like this thing right over here in the middle of the dashboard is basically just one gigantic callback. Where we actually were specifying 3 or 4 different outputs and 3 or 4 different inputs, and depending on their different values, we do one thing or the other.
Gotcha. Cool.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So big thing here, if you are modifying something with a callback, you don't actually want to have anything here. Okay. The whole point that this kind of changes on the fly, so you don't want to declare something permanently here. So you want to get rid of this. Okay, so the idea is we're going to sort of recreate the value of figure on the fly. All right, so same thing. Because we have input right over here. Okay, and this is basically going to correspond to whatever this value is right over here. Okay. All right, and then what we're going to do here is this line right over here. We basically want to create this depending on whatever value is chosen from the drop-down menu. So we see over here, right? Every single value, every single option has this value thing right over here. On purpose, it corresponds to a column label, right? It has to be that way because the idea is we want to take whatever value is chosen right over here and then pass it into this part right over here like this. So let's go ahead. All right, and so for Devin and everyone else, this is the part we want to make sure we're clear on. Okay, so when we declare state grouping, we want to make sure it corresponds to whatever item that we're checking in from the drop-down box. And then the value that's going to be passed into this function over here is determined by what we put in right over here like this. Okay, which will then go ahead and then set this thing right over here. Okay. All right, so we'll do this. And then I'll just, again, do a little bit of copying and pasting right over here. Okay, so we're creating the chart the same way, right? But it's a bit more programmatic. Okay, and then notice here, all right, sorry, I'm kind of a stickler for these things. I like them all to line up the right way. Okay, and then notice here, right, this value corresponds to a column label. So in this case, the column label is defined by whatever is being passed in right over here. We have to return something. Like that, return fig. Okay, right? So this is what the function is returning, and that's what we're passing in to the figure attribute right over here. And so this is basically kind of this perpetual motion event loop where people can continually select something and then run a function to get some sort of new value and then pass it back into whatever element we want to change. All right, so now if we do this, maybe this thing will work. Or maybe not. Okay. So I'll go ahead and restart this. Okay. So we have this now, right? And so now the beauty of this is now we've gone ahead and then linked our different things here, okay? And we can see the corresponding change right over here inside the chart, okay? And so actually building interesting callbacks is sort of what allows a dashboard to be a dashboard, okay? And we're pretty much going to sort of, add 3 or more things to this today, and then we'll call it a day. Okay. Questions, anyone? Okay.
Sorry,
yeah.
I'm not able to run the application. It seems to get stuck, and then I had to abort it by pressing.
Are you getting an explicit error message, or are you?
No. I got the same lines that you get as well, but then as soon as you get them, then your application is deployed. Whereas for me, I just wait and wait and wait, and nothing happens. So we
okay. All right. Tell you what, we're going to take a 10-minute break. I'll just look at it here, okay?
Okay.
All right?
Let's do that then.
Yeah, let's do that. All right, sounds good, everyone. Now, since we're kind of officially off break. So yeah, the idea, anything you do here, so where you have, okay, anything here where you have HTML dot whatever, right? HTML, H2P, things along those lines, all of it corresponds To whatever HTML tag you want to use. Most people actually know HTML, even if they don't realize that they actually know HTML. Okay. So basically here, what this corresponds to, let me see if I can give you a good example here.
Okay.
Okay. Like if you've ever done any sort of like word editor, right, for like adding stuff. Let me see here. Okay. So if you do something like this, right, which is add a title.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Or this used to be a lot more a lot more descriptive for what I was trying to, like, they made this super postmodern and minimalist now, so it's hard to kind of represent it. But let me take a look here. All right, so any web page that you see, all right, if you go over here and look at the source code,
Mm-hmm.
okay, you'll basically see a collection of tags like this.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. And so, for example, here, P is paragraph, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you see something like this, right? It's basically the equivalent of taking whatever you're doing and then putting it inside the paragraph tag.
Okay.
Okay, so essentially, and so different tags are basically just used to render things in different styles. So P is a paragraph. Anything like H1, H2, H3 corresponds to a heading, like this.
Okay.
Okay, and notice here we had the div, right? HTML div. Okay, these things are kind of like wrappers you put around other elements. So basically, every single set of tags that you might use, Elisa, basically corresponds to some sort of visual element that you see on a web page.
Okay.
And so it's basically how you use Python to sort of specify what kind of HTML you want to use. And so, and again, HTML basically works the same way, but different sets of tags just display things in different ways. So for example here, H1 would be the main heading. So this is basically if you wanted a piece of text to be as big as it could be, you would put it inside of an H1 tag, whereas something like a paragraph is just normal text.
Yeah, I noticed the difference when I changed it from P to H2. That it was bigger. Yeah.
P is basically just corresponds to just regular text.
Yeah.
And then, H1, H2, H3 are different types of heading, and then there are maybe 50 or 60 different HTML tags, but there are 7 or 8 that you use over and over and over again, like divs, paragraphs, and headings.
All right, awesome. Good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead. Let's add some more stuff to this. All right. So we have a callback. Let's go back to the folder that we have, the file that we have right now. It should look something like this, right? And so in your browser, you should have something like this. Okay. So it is kind of a functioning dashboard, right? I mean, it's not too elaborate, but you have a chart and then it renders itself automatically. Okay, so what we're going to do now, all right, we're going to take a look at a slightly different element of a callback. All right, so we have output right over here. We have input right over here. Something that's useful about Dash is you can define multiple outputs and multiple inputs. Okay, so as an example here, let's try this. All right, we have our graph. And let's just try something like this. Okay, description right over here. Okay, notice here we're not going to actually put in anything yet. Okay, we're just going to leave it right over here. Okay, so the idea then, okay, here, right, we just specified one particular output, but notice here how input is inside of a list, okay? This means you can basically define many inputs if you would like. All right. And in the same vein, you can also define many outputs. All right. So you can kind of create these fairly elaborate input-output machines, depending on how you want to set things up. So what we'll do over here, we'll add one more of these items. Description. Okay. Now the idea here, when we have something like this, HTML H2, and we just kind of pass this in, where it says our first Dash application. Okay, this is actually the children argument. Okay, so the kind of what we're doing here is doing that. Okay, so the idea is typically if you want to go ahead and specify text in some way or another, okay, usually the default thing that you try and go ahead and grab and change is the children argument like this. Okay. Okay. So essentially here, what this means, all right, this function here has two separate outputs. So that means it has to go ahead and then it has to return two separate items. Okay. So let's just try to do something like this. All right. So here, we're just defining a string right over here. Okay, and then we're just kind of taking this value right over here. In fact, we should just be able to do this. Hold on, let's just do state grouping max. That should work, actually. I don't think we need that. So we can, yeah, that should be fine. Okay, state grouping max like this. Okay, and then now what we're going to do, okay, so same thing, right? We have two separate outputs, right? Main fig figure and then description children like this, which correspond to this part and that thing. And so now, right, depending on the input, we are basically creating two different variables and then returning them. Let's save this. Let's run it. And let's get an error message, because apparently, okay, type error, list indices must be integers or slices, not input. All right, so that probably means I'm gonna guess. Let's try that. Hold on. Okay. Okay, and so we should be able to see here, right? It's not super coherent now, but the idea then is this callback now has two separate outputs. Okay, so when we change this, the graph changes, and then we also get different values over here, down here in kind of our throwaway paragraph. Okay.
It basically just passes it in order.
It passes it in order, correct. Yep.
Sorry, what did you change on your script? Because you got an error. before.
Yeah, so what I changed, Elisa, is so my output list right over here
Okay.
needed to have a comma before the input list.
Right. Okay. Great. Thanks.
Right. And so again, Devin had a good kind of question here. So the way this works here, right, is we're defining output 1, output 2. And so therefore, what we're mapping to those outputs is the order in which these things are returned from the function. Okay. And so we are using, right, this figure right over here to create our grouping, and then also the paragraph right over here, right, and then returning both of them, and then not one, but 2 things are changing. All right, and so this is kind of the nuts and bolts of building dashboards, is mapping a bunch of inputs to callbacks. All right, we're going to go ahead. We're not going to do the lab in one fell swoop. We're going to try and do it maybe 5 or 10 minutes at a time. All right, but for now, everyone, what I want us to do, we take a look at okay. So take a look at over here where it says daily totals, for metric right over here. Okay, go ahead, just make a small modification to the callback, okay? That will go ahead, and then when you sort of click on the different value right over here, okay, just display the label of the column. Don't worry about the date yet, okay? We won't worry about that, okay? But just kind of go ahead. This is if you want to go ahead and open it up here. In the lab, we're actually at question 2 right now, okay? And so essentially kind of what you want to do here, it'll look a little bit different than this, all right? But go ahead, modify the callback that we just made. This one should be fairly straightforward, I think, okay? And just make sure you have some sort of paragraph right over here, which just sort of tells you what metric that was chosen, okay? Something analogous to this. All right, again, this would be question 2 on the lab if we have it. And let's just try and go ahead and take 5 minutes, all right? So same thing, let me know if you have any questions, and we'll reconvene here shortly. Okay, great. All right, so I'll go ahead here. I'll start sharing. Okay. By the way, one of the challenges of building dashboards, the way people like to use them, it's fairly common. You eventually get pretty big callbacks. The biggest one that I've seen, I think, had 8 different inputs and 6 different outputs. So there were 14 different things that had to get kept track of inside one single function call. So that tends to be one of the sort of the weak points of doing this, but luckily we haven't gotten there yet. All right, so in any event, all right, so let's do this just to make this look a little bit better. Okay, we'll have this thing. I'll put it on top of the graph just because I think it looks better there. Okay, I'll call it chart description just to make it a bit more semantic. And then paragraph is fairly small. To make it maybe look a little bit larger, we can do something here like H6. That's the smallest possible heading that you have. Okay, it would change the styling a little bit. Okay, so for output right over here, chart description. By the way, if you're trying to change the value of something, the 2 arguments you're going to change most often are either going to be children or value. Okay, so if you kind of wanted to change what shows up in something, these 2 are probably going to be the most common, and figure, of course, if you're modifying a chart. All right, so we'll do this, right? And then this one's actually fairly straightforward, right? We can just do like that. Okay, and then we can go ahead, take this, rerun it. then that should be fine. Okay. All right. So yeah, here we go. All right. So showing COVID data for hospitalized increase. All right. And so now the idea then, right, is, right, every single time you touch this, these two things change simultaneously. All right. So if you did not get that, go ahead and let me know. I'm happy to help anyone sort of walk through their error messages. But if not, we're going to work, kind of go right into our second part.
Sorry, can I just have a look at your?
Yeah, of course, Elisa.
Please, thanks.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, so we have this thing right over here.
Mm-hmm.
Right, that's what we want to stick our text into. This could be H6, H5, P, whatever. I just did this for styling reasons. All right.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
We have the ID, which is chart description. So that's what we're saying right over here, right? So we want we're kind of identifying what part we want to use as output right over there.
Mm-hmm.
And usually if you want to change something's display, you're either going to be either figure, value, or children. But in this case, for anything that's text-based, what you see, and the text is actually part of the children argument. So that's why we're specifying this right over here.
Okay.
Okay, right. So kind of in the same way, right? We have HTML.h2, and then the children argument is our first dash application. So it works the same thing with this or paragraphs. And then here, right, inside the callback, we are accepting this as input.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then we're just using that to set up our text right over here. And then, like Devin mentioned, these things get modified in order. So therefore, the first thing returned from the function should be the chart. The second thing returned should be the text you actually want to put inside this
right
over there. All right, so that's the basic setup. Feel free to take a few more minutes. We're actually going to go ahead and go into another question 3 here pretty soon. So,
okay, no, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay.
I can't see where I went wrong. Okay, cool.
Okay,
Thanks.
beautiful, beautiful. All right. So here, what we have, we take a look, right? Literally, what we're going to be doing here throughout the class is sort of building out this thing right over here. So we're getting there, right? You could add text right over here if you wanted. Okay, we have drop down right over here, and then notice here. Okay, we don't really have anything with time data yet, so we can't really add this part about the dates. Okay, but right, we have this part. What we're going to add in next is this thing. Okay, and so this is where. Okay, we're going to sort of keep making our current dashboard more like the finished one right over here. So this part, right, is just a checkbox. Okay. And this is the second element that we're going to go ahead and add. All right, so let's do this. So we have dcc.dropdown right over here. Okay, again, something you should clue yourself into. Anything that binds user inputs to the data returned by the application is going to be a part of the DCC part thing right over here. Okay, so in this case, this is a dropdown. This one, I think, is a checklist. I'm pretty sure. Okay, let's do this checklist. Okay, same thing. We're going to use it as part of a callback. So we can just do something like this, cumulative. Okay. And I think, you know what? Let me just check it in here over here. I just want to go ahead. You know, one of the things that's a little tedious about this is just sort of finding all these different arguments and how they're specified. So let me go ahead. Let's just do a quick lookup. All right, so we have, okay, so we have ID. Okay, all right, it's the same thing over here. It works just like the dropdown, excuse me. All right, so let's do this. All right, it works very much the same way. All right, and so let's do this. Okay, in this case, we want this thing to say cumulative. So we'll do this. Okay, and then here, what we'll put for the value, we don't, again, the value is basically what you want to be used inside of your callback function. In this case, we'll make the value of this thing true. Okay. All right. And then let's just label it like this. And the same thing, let's do this. We'll say value right over here is equal to true like this right over here. All right. Notice over here, all these things are inside of the children argument, and it's a list. So we have to make sure these things are separated by commas. All right. So this is our second element that we're adding. All right. And then let's go ahead over here. Let's restart the application just to make sure it renders correctly. All right. And it is not. It looks like I got an error message right over here. And so options value passed into checklist with ID, cumulative, expected in array. Okay. All right. Okay, this is not quite. So I have something a little bit incorrect here with how I set this up. It's not quite clear. I'm actually going to cheat here a little bit, everyone. Give me 1 minute. Session 3, label. You know what I'm going to do over here? I'm just going to do a quick Google check. Sorry, I waved the white flag. Sorry, everyone. All right, and let me just see here. There's something about the way it's being passed in, which is, okay, all right, here it is. Okay. I think the issue here is I was trying to specify what it is, and it needs to be a list. Okay, so what we'll do instead. Okay, that was the cause of the problem over here. So basically here, if you're in debug mode, one of the benefits of it is it'll tell you what error messages are firing up. So right over here, right? So invalid argument option 0.value passed in the checklist with cumulative expected in array, but with supplied type Boolean. So the idea here, it's expecting this to be a list, but instead we're just passing a single value. So what we want to do instead is like that. All right, so let's give that a shot. And then go ahead and restart things. All right, let this thing go. All right, let's refresh this. Hopefully this made it go away. It did not. And where am I going wrong here, everyone? Invalid, valid, I passed the checklist with ID. All right. Let me do one more thing here, everyone. Sorry about this. In fact, let me just check the source code over here. There's something simple about what I'm missing. So let me just find out exactly where it is. It's something very, very small.
It's definitely the value equals true. When I get rid of that, it works. So something to do with that.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. So this value, okay. All right. So Devin, you're basically saying the value thing was kind of what's causing the, okay.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. All right. That would make sense. I'm actually just trying to figure out, you know what, let's get rid of this for now. That looks to me like it should be correct, but in any event, if it's not playing nicely, we'll just see if we can get rid of it for now. Okay. It's actually not even the most important thing. All right. Thank you, Devin.
It's working now.
I hope so. Let's take a look. All right. Options with ID. I sometimes even wonder if this thing is.
Oh, maybe I was wrong.
Okay. No, it's okay. Is anybody have it working on their own computers? Or are we all stuck in the mud the same way?
I have the same error, actually.
Same error message?
Yes, too.
Okay. All right. Let's try. I just want to check a few things over here. Again, it's not clear to me why this isn't working, and it seems like it's.
Oh, I got it to work.
Okay.
So
Do you have a diagnosis?
I changed the first value, like in the options list,
Yeah.
to a string instead of Boolean, like true or false.
Okay.
And then in the value, like the default value, I put the string of cumulative instead of like true.
Okay. All right. Maybe that's it. Okay. All right. Let me just hold on. I just wanted, for my own sanity here, I just want to check something. Because from what I can tell, what I'm doing matches almost exactly what this is right over here. So let me just check here. And then, Devin, would you mind just pasting whatever it is that you have so we can all see it? All right, thank you. All right, but let me just try this. All right, because to my eye, I don't actually see why this thing doesn't work, but it does in the actual working version of it. So let me just do a sanity check. Oh, okay. For the ID, I actually think here. Okay. Yeah, maybe it doesn't like the Boolean value with it. Maybe that's the problem. Is that really what it is, Devin? Is essentially it just should be wrapped up in a string like this?
That's what worked for me.
Okay. All right. No, it actually, for whatever it's worth, it sounds, if you read through this, invalid argument options value passed in the checklists. All right, maybe that's what it's complaining about. So let's try. Is it in, okay, all right, that seemed to work just fine. Okay, all right. All right, thanks for the help, I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so everyone else here, let's take a moment to see if we can get it. All right, let me know if we're there, and then we'll continue. Okay. All right. If you don't have this working, go ahead and let me know. We'll make a note of it. But again, we're going to go into question 3 here pretty soon. Okay. Yeah, my guess is, okay, yeah, thanks. I would, yeah, that would make sense about, usually value typically has to match whatever whatever you have for the value key, and that's what's going to get moved around. Okay. Small issue though. All right. Okay, so we should have this little checkbox right over here that we can go ahead and then click on and click off, right? And so the idea then is what we're going to go ahead and then add in now. Okay, is we're going to go ahead and update our callback. So that way, what we're going to do here, if this value is checked, okay, we're going to go ahead and do a cumulative grouping like this. So this is basically, right, takes the summation for the metric throughout the entire data set. Okay, if this is not checked right over here, okay, what we're going to go ahead and do then is just get the COVID values for the most recent date. Okay, so real quickly here, usually a good thing to do here before you add something into a callback is just to verify whatever the value looks like. Okay, so in this case, let's just kind of do a quick check. Let's create a simple div. By the way, sometimes if you're developing something, this is not a bad idea to have kind of a dummy div that you can just dump values into just to kind of confirm whatever it is that you're passing around inside your callback. Okay, and so it's important here, right? We're going to go ahead and we're going to have 2 inputs now, right? So we have the drop-down value. Okay, and then also here we have this thing called cumulative. All right, and so the same thing, it's going to be the value passed in right over here. Our function now right accepts 2 inputs. So we have this right over here. All right, and then what we're going to do here okay, just to do a quick check here, all right, what I want us to do okay, so inside of our paragraph, just do a quick check just to kind of confirm this, whatever we sort of check the box for cumulative, what's actually being passed into us into our function. And so then once we do that, we can go ahead and then go on to question 3 for the lab and then carry on. So let's do this. All right, let's rerun it. Let's actually, you know what? I created this when I didn't need to. So if you're following along with me, let's just get rid of it. Because all I'm doing now, right, is I'm taking this thing, okay, and then just passing in the value of the cumulative check mark. All right, and so now we run through this, all right? So what's probably the important detail here, when we check, right, whatever's in cumulative right over here, the values are being passed inside of a list. Okay, so effectively what we want to do is sort of check, right? So if the first value inside this list is equal to the word true, then basically create this chart using the cumulative values using the grouping. But if not, then go ahead and then use values for the last day in the data set. Okay, so that's what we're going to go ahead and then add to this callback right over here. All right, I'm going to give us about 10 minutes. And then in the Slack channel, I'll add a bit more context if we need some more to work off of. But effectively here, what we want is something that allows the dashboard to more or less work like this, right? So, okay, if you uncheck cumulative, this pretty much just kind of tells us like what's happening right now. Okay, but if you check cumulative, this is kind of what's been happening since the beginning of COVID. All right, so we'll take about 10 minutes to do this, but before we go ahead and take a quick break, any questions or things that aren't clear to anyone?
So for the checklist,
Yeah.
when the value equals the string true, it's checked. And basically when the value does not equal the string true, it's unchecked. Like it can be anything.
Important. So the value for the checklist, remember, is passed inside of a list. So when the first item inside the list is equal to true, that means you checked it. When it returns an empty list, that means it's unchecked.
I see.
So small detail, right? Because it's not just the value true or not.
Right.
So it gives you a list, so you have to check the first item in the list. For whatever it's worth, empty list return false. So for example, I'll put it in chat over here. If you do something like that, that actually is false. Like if you put an empty list like that.
I see. Okay. Cool.
So it actually wouldn't be too difficult to check to see if it was checked, because if the list had anything at all, it would return true.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, but you would want to be careful if you had something like multiple checkdowns and people could kind of choose 2 or 3 different things. You need to pick out the items inside the list.
Right.
Okay. Okay. Other questions? Yeah, good. It's important to make sure you have a good handle on sort of what the callback values being passed into you are, which is kind of the whole point of that last exercise. Okay. Okay. All right. So again, I'll go ahead. If you have the lab, we're basically doing question 3 right over here. Okay. And I'll type in some more stuff in Slack if you want to take a look at it. So let's take 10, everyone. All right. And then we will meet on the other side. All right. So let me know if you have any questions, and we'll talk soon.
Oh, sorry, I had one more question.
Yeah, go ahead.
What do we mean by cumulative here? Like,
yeah, so basically, big thing over here is, let me go ahead and present my screen.
like it's cumulative right now, right?
Yeah, it's cumulative right now. Yeah, so the idea is if it's not cumulative, you're basically creating a filter that just grabs the values from the last state.
From the most recent day?
Most recent day, yeah.
Got it. Okay, cool, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. So you're just basically grabbing the max state and taking the all 56 states.
Right. Okay, cool.
Yep. All right, everyone, let's kind of take a minute, wrap up what we're doing, and we will walk through it. Yeah, Elisa.
Sorry, I left the definition under the DCC checklist with the true under inverted commas, or
I'm not sure I understand your question, Elisa. I'm sorry.
you remember that we had few things not quite working okay when we put the options with the label cumulative value and true, and then value equals the square bracket true.
Yeah.
And we left that line.
Yeah, well, that was rectified a little bit here. So the idea here, the problem is apparently literally just putting in the value true didn't work. And so the modification that we made to get it running here, Lisa, if you look over here for the checklist, am I sharing? Actually, I don't think I am. Sorry. All right. The code that Devin used is in the chat if you want to take a look at it.
No, I'm using that one, but
Right.
I couldn't get it to work by using that one.
All right.
And,
Is the checklist working? Is it the checklist that's a problem or the callback?
no, the callback. The callback.
Okay, all right, yeah. That is probably because just because of how I'm gonna guess how you're actually checking for the value of the how you're checking the value inside the checkbox is probably a little bit off. But we're gonna walk through it now here for whatever.
I'll wait for that then. Thanks.
So yeah, that's gonna be covered. So any other questions before we continue? All right, then. All right, let's take a look here. All right, so again, we're kind of inching closer to something that's more functional. So big thing here, right? If we look at where we're at, okay. So we have the drop down over here. We have the checkbox, and again, kind of what we were angling at before here. What's really important is that when you add something, when you check the checkbox right over here, the results are returned to you in a list. Okay, so actually something that kind of jumped out at me, Elisa, when you sort of mentioned, like when we kind of put the values inside the brackets, what we were doing is we were passing the values inside of a list. You know, so it wasn't just sort of like kind of generic kind of brackets or things along those lines. So the idea then, essentially here, if the way this is going to work is if we check this thing, the value of this is going to be this entire thing right over here, right? But if it's unchecked, it's going to be equal to an empty list. All right, so essentially here, the way this would work all right, we essentially want to say if cumulative val is an empty list. Okay, because basically, right, because if this is not checked, then this thing's going to be an empty list. So there are a few ways we could do this, but you know, you could do this, right? Because the idea here, real quickly here, the Boolean value of an empty list is false. So for example, if you do something like this, so the idea is this expression will actually return true. So this is probably the quickest way to check to see if something's an empty list. All right, so you could do this. You could also try something like this. Right, so if the length is 0, that also tells you there's nothing in it, whatever, you know, things along those lines. So one thing you might not want, one place where you can get into trouble here is if you had something like this, let's like a variable here called cumulative val, and set it equal to an empty list, okay? What might be intuitive if you did something like this. Right, so if that condition, right, is true, then go ahead and do it. The problem, though, here is that if we have an empty list, this entire expression is going to return an error message. Okay, so if you do something like this, that won't work. And my hunch, Elisa, is this may have been one of the problems you were running into, is maybe you had your comparison set up this way.
Correct.
Yeah. Because the idea is sometimes this list has something inside of it, but other times it doesn't. And so therefore, like you wouldn't be able to do this because literally nothing exists at that position. So for this case, setting up the comparison, you'd basically want to check to see if it's an empty list first, and then if it's not, then do something else. So yeah, the if statement, the if check should be to see if the list is empty at all. All right.
So that true that we put under options, it could be anything.
Really, yeah, it could be anything. Yes, it wouldn't really matter in this case. But
Yeah.
Lots of circumstances it would matter. So.
Yeah.
All right. But in this case, yeah, we could just do it like this.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll do this. All right. So you're definitely I'm humming like you're in good shape now.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks.
All right. So the idea then, actually, hold on. No, excuse me. So the idea is, so if it's an empty list, we could do something like this. We could say state grouping is equal to so we'll create a query. So we'll say df. I think it's called date. I think that's the name of the column. Yeah, date. Okay. So we could say df.date is equal to df.date max. Okay, so real quickly here, right? This is just something. If you put this in, this is going to return the true and false values for the entire data set. And then we could do something like this, state grouping. Let me know if what I'm doing here is not clear. This is where you kind of have to keep track, right, of your different callback values and where they're going. Okay. So see here, right? If we do something like this, just make sure this is being verified. Because sometimes one of the harder parts with callbacks is just kind of understanding where stuff is going in and going out. All right. So the idea then, our query is this thing that returns true, false.
Yeah.
Okay. So where it's true, it means that's where the highest date is. Yeah, Elisa.
I was using the last bracket, the same expression that we had before. Instead of putting some, if you put last, would it return the last?
You know what? That would probably be fine too. Yeah. That would be good. Yeah. In fact, that might even be a little bit easier. Yeah.
Yeah. No. I mean, yeah. No, that's fine. That's the one I used.
Yeah. No. The only thing I wouldn't be certain if it was giving you the last value for the date or the last value for one of the other columns. That's the only thing I would want to check. I'm not sure off the top of my head if it would automatically give you the last date versus.
Yeah, because it's still getting the drop down val.
Okay.
So.
All right. Let me just take a look here. I just want to.
Okay, never mind.
No, it's fine. Actually, because that would work fine. You just have to get the last day. It doesn't really matter. So that would be okay. And then.
I think I somewhat remember that if you do the last one and if your data set is not chronological, then it might mess things up. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think you could definitely do it. My general hunch, though, is you'd have to have things maybe encoded a particular way. And it might be particular to what you have as an index and things like that. But actually, what you might be able to do here, I'm almost certain you could go ahead and then use the last argument if you wanted to. So we could probably do something like this. Let me see over here. So group by state, then group by date. And then, was this what you were doing, Elisa?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, for whatever it's worth here, I don't think, again, we could go into this later on because there probably is a way to go ahead and do it. Usually what the idea is here, usually, Elisa, if you just kind of pass something in like this and you have more than one value for each state, I think it'll automatically take something like the first or the last row. So I wouldn't know for certain. So even though if it's rendering, I don't know for certain if the values would actually be correct.
Okay. Oh, well.
I'm not saying it wouldn't be, because there almost certainly is a way to kind of do this. But I'm just real quickly, like when you run it like this, right? It pretty much. No, we probably would want to do this. Hold on. I guess we'd want to get rid of the date here.
To be honest, just this date.
Yeah, you could. I would double check it, but I think it probably. Yeah, and so here where it's giving 0, because I think it depends on how things are. Like what Rashad was saying, that it's the way it's ordered. So maybe if we did something like this, I think you kind of get the idea. You just have to make sure of a few of these details, and then, okay, this looks good. Last group by, and then state. I think if you did this, like if you had, like Rashad mentioned, like if you have it sort of listed in ascending order for date, then you should be okay.
Yeah.
Increase right over here. Okay, dot last. Okay, I'm gonna guess that that's the correct one. Although you probably want to double check for yourself.
Yeah, to be honest, I didn't check.
Yeah, I understand.
And it was okay, but I don't know. Probably should have checked.
Yeah,
that.
I would just a little be careful just to make sure you're getting like the actual right time values. But I would think this is the right one. I'm not sure. Like I think that works. But in any event, okay. If you have that, that's fine. You just have to get the last values. So
Thanks.
whatever. Yeah, no worries. All right. So we can do this. DF look. As long as you sort of understand how to grab the values and get your stuff, then that's really all that matters. Okay, now notice this thing. This is not a data frame. There's no column label. I'm going to keep using the way I did it, but like if you did last or something like that, that's fine. There are 3 or 4 different ways to do this. So probably what I'll do here is just put this into a list like this. That looks good. And then the final thing we'll do over here, we also need the state. Okay, so the idea here, I just want to make sure these results, okay, this looks good, right? So now we have the column with the state and then the column with the positive increase. So as long as you have something, in fact, we could check to see if these things match. And actually, I think they do. Yeah, they look the same to me. Okay, but in any event, all right, we'll just do this. All right, but in any event, right, you have to sort of filter things out by the last date. Okay, and right, remember, drop-down val is what we ever have chosen, the drop-down box. Okay, so state grouping right over here. And then we can say date. Max like this. Okay, and else. Okay, we can just kind of do the standard state grouping. And then the idea is we want the value of the paragraph to be slightly different, right? Depending on whether or not we're using cumulative values or not. So we could do something like this, paragraph. And then we'll say, this is basically to say, right, we're showing the COVID data, for positive increase or hospitalizations or things like that. And then also on dates. And then I don't know if this is probably not going to be formatted in the best way. So we could probably clean that up a little bit, but it's okay for now. And then else we're going to do. Okay, at this point, you're just kind of doing regular coding. The harder part is kind of figuring out how things fit into callbacks. Okay, all right. All right, so we've got 2 separate things going on, right? So we have the dropdown that people are choosing. We have the checkbox that people are choosing. And then, right, we're saying basically if they did not check the checkbox, we're going to get the most recent value. And we're doing it this way. There are 3 or 4 different ways you could do this. So, I wouldn't be too picky about that right now. If not, then we're saying get the cumulative values, and then we're changing the value of the paragraph we're going to return because we only want to display the dates and if it's not cumulative. And then, the way this callback is set up is we have two different outputs, right? Main fig, which is the chart, and then the description itself. And so we're returning each of these values right over here. Okay, but the big thing is we're changing the value of state grouping and we're changing the value of paragraph depending on whatever it is that people choose. All right, so let's run this. And with any luck, no error messages. All right, and so now, right, if we do this, okay, and it works, right? So if you want to confirm things, right, you should be able to see here, the scale on the right-hand side changes considerably if you're doing cumulative values or not. All right, and so, and then you can go back and forth. All right, and so we have this beautiful dashboard, right? That's a bit more functional than it was 2.5 hours ago. All right, questions, anyone? Okay, so what we're going to do here, we're just going to take a look. So question 4, okay, is we're going to go ahead and just kind of, we're not going to finish it today. We'll kind of pick this up next class. But the idea here, the finished version of what we're going to be building is if you go ahead and click on a particular state like this, it'll return a bunch of specific info about the state in this particular table right over here. Okay, so all we're just going to do here is we're just going to kind of work through how to create hover data, or like how to kind of grab it and then pass it into a callback and sort of use it for one thing or the other. It's the same basic idea, but the hover data actually gets returned to you in a big dictionary. So you have to unpack it a little bit. So let's do this. Let's go back in to our file right over here. Okay, let's make a new div. Okay, let's call this, let's give it an ID. Let's call it table div. Okay, same thing. We're not going to add anything to it yet. We're going to do something for demonstration purposes. All right, and then let's add this output here to our callback, right? So the ID here is table div, so we'll add it right over here. Right, the default thing for a value is children, so we'll go and specify that right over here. Okay, and now also what we're going to do, okay, the idea here, this chart right over here, okay, is basically the idea is if you click on something, it's used as input into a callback. Okay, as evidenced by the fact that like if you click on different states right over here, you have different things show up over here like that. All right, so what we're going to do, okay, we're going to have 3 separate outputs and then 3 separate inputs just for now, okay? And in fact, I'm actually not entirely certain if this is going to work, but we'll just kind of go with it for now. Pretty sure if this does not work, Bash is going to give us an error message. So if we're breaking one of its rules, it'll go ahead and then block the whole thing from running. Okay, so now really important here, right? So basically, we want the information contained in each one of these states when we click on it. And so luckily here, so one of the nice things about plotly dash, is, so we have this argument here over here, right, called figure, right, or children or value. Something else you can specify is click data. Okay.
Is that specific to the chart type?
I'm pretty sure it's actually it works in an analogous way, Devin, for any chart, I believe, where each individual chart mark would contain basically all the summary information for that particular mark. So if it was a bar, it would be every single bar that you clicked on. In this case, it's a state.
Gotcha.
But I think it more or less works the same way for every single Plotly chart.
Gotcha. Okay.
Now, the one thing I don't quite remember is I'm not sure if you can actually use a particular element as both input and output. So this might require a new callback, but we'll see. All right, let's just run it for now. All right, so same thing. Since we have a new input right over here, you have to add it like this. All right, and then the same thing, all I want us to do is just kind of observe what the click data looks like. Because again, it's a fairly big dictionary. So in the same way, right, we had to sort of make sure that we kind of understood that like cumulative val is actually giving us a list. Click data is giving us a dictionary. So let's kind of take a look. And so all we're going to do here, a good way of displaying dictionaries is using the JSON library. All right, so import that right up here, import JSON. Okay, and then let's do this. Okay, this is basically a command. It's one of the more straightforward and foolproof ways to render a dictionary inside the browser. Okay, so let's do this. And then same thing, let's just kind of go ahead. We'll return the third item from our function. And then we're just kind of taking the click data and just dumping it into this div right over here. So this thing is kind of unintelligent right now because we're just want to sort of make sure we can observe when you actually click on an item inside of a chart, what is actually getting passed into us. All right, let's go ahead. Let's restart the app. All right, and then let's refresh. Yeah, all right. We're getting a callback error right over here. Expected 3, got 2. Did I forget a comma? Oh, I think I forgot to save this thing. Whoops, sorry. Is it rendering for anyone else? Me? Do we have any success inside the class?
No.
No. All right. It doesn't work for anyone. Okay. Okay. All right. Let's take a look. Okay, that should work. Here, sorry. My one issue. I just forgot to save. I forgot to save the final chart. Okay, but the idea here is if it renders correctly, you should see this new dictionary popping up on the bottom. Okay, and that's basically what you use to detect what's being clicked. All right, so let me know if you get it. That's where we're going to end the class right now. So I'll go ahead here. If you can't get your callback working, go ahead and let me know. All right, feel free to take a few minutes. I always like knowing that we're walking away in a good note. So if you're having a hard time getting something to run correctly, please let me know. And this is basically where we're going to pick up next class. We're pretty much going to go ahead and take, the information from here to kind of create a table over here, based off of whatever state that we're clicking on. Okay, so Devin has it. Again, same thing. Feel free to give me an update, but that is basically where we're going to wrap things up today. Okay, and it's kind of the same thing, right? So this way, pretty much what we're going to do here is notice right over here where it says location OR or CA. This is basically just a moniker for whatever the value is. So the idea is every single time someone clicks on this, we're going to filter our original data set just to include this state, and then pull up a bunch of different values for one thing or the other. All right. And then also next class, we're going to go ahead and we're going to add this thing down here. Okay, the little time bar, and then add in some more callbacks. So there are a few different callbacks we're going to go ahead and then add in. And then that's really going to be the majority of the sort of like interactivity part. And then class after that, we'll go into styling. And then we'll take a brief break. We'll actually then talk about modeling, right? And kind of how to go ahead and then actually build the forecast. And then anyone who was in part of the COVID, the forecasting lessons, you could actually take almost the exact same code and then reuse it. But also there'll be some other starter files for using things like random forests or gradient boosted machines or linear regression. All right, and so we'll kind of work with that and then put this thing on the web when we're done. Good. All right, so let's kind of wrap things up, call it a day. All right, so I think the next one, we're going to go back to Tuesday classes. So if you look in the Slack channel, it should be there, but I believe the next day is going to be the 26th. Double check over here, or rather 23rd, excuse me. So next class is in 10 days, February 23rd. And then I think we're going to be on the Tuesday plan for at least next couple of days, next couple of classes. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing here, stop recording.